My name is Angela Gates. I worked here at the library for 12 years, and cemeteries and local history are my passion. If you've seen my license plates, you know that. They say Deathlane. I love cemeteries. I love the history of cemeteries. Talking about cemeteries, I mean, if you get me going off on a tangent, that's what it's going to be.
You're going to be sitting here for the entire day.
You're right.
Maybe for the rest of your life.
This is my child, Echo. I'm thrilled to have
Call
Echo
me
here
Echo
with
for
me.
a second.
I'm thrilled to have Echo with me today. We've done a lot of cemetery tours since you were a very small child, so I'm really glad you could come today. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I took this picture of Oakland Cemetery. I think it's probably one of the better views, and I mean, you can really see a lot of the different types of stones that are out there. You can get a feel for exactly how vast and rolling and just vibrant this cemetery is. So some of the first cemeteries in Keokuk actually weren't the big Oakland that we know of today. The first ones were small cemeteries. This one was at 2nd and Blondo. The diaries of Dr. J.M. Schaefer actually indicate there were skeletons buried underneath what is now a yellow house with a green roof. There's lots of newspaper articles later that go on to say that that was the case, that they found skeletons buried there. Those burials that were there were believed to be victims of the cholera epidemic in 1849 and 1850. There's another one over at 12th and Des Moines. My in-laws live just across the street from this. I said, did you know there used to be a cemetery across the street? Nope. Of course, there's not now. It's not that we know of. We hope that when they started reinterring burials over at Oakland, we hope they got all the burials that were there.
Which way are they? Which way are?
The alley that comes down right in the middle. This is Des Moines right here, and then you can see Palin in the distance. This is going down 12th Street. There was another one rumored to be at 5th and Timea. I've never actually been able to confirm that this absolutely did exist, but again, it would have been victims of cholera, people who maybe came up the river on one of the boats and for whatever reason didn't make it. They would have been interred in one of the cemeteries like this one or like the one over at 2nd Blondo. Also, lots of cholera victims. There was lots of illness in the 1850s, and you know, cleanliness being what it was, the cemeteries had to go where they had room. In addition to the cemeteries in town, there's lots of rural cemeteries. Folks like to keep their deceased loved ones nearby. They had the Turner Family Cemetery, which still is in existence. Of course, it's not an active burial ground anymore, but this one's located near Valley Road and Johnson Street Road. It's up a hill, just kind of off in the grass next to someone's home. And the residents there take care of it. And if you're interested, you can usually get in touch with the homeowners and they'll take you back there and you can take a look at it. But this actually was the Turner family, and they were the parents and family members of Annie Wittenmeyer, who was a Civil War nurse and social advocate, very, very well-known local figure. So without further ado, we will get to Oakland. There was a meeting in May of 1851 that called for, it basically announced the need for a cemetery for the city. The city was starting to grow really rapidly, and folks decided that the small city cemeteries just weren't doing it anymore. They needed a larger place to put their dead and to be able to go and commemorate the lives of those that had gone on before them. So in May of 1851, the city got together and they purchased 30 acres of land to get started. They later bumped that up to 40 acres of land, and they got the cemetery going. So this is the most recent map. This is what we have now. This is from 2014. Paul French did this redrawing. We also have maps from the 1930s, 1950s, and from 2007. And we can actually go in and bring up one of these maps. We can enlarge the block that you're looking for so that you can actually see the lots and the individual grave sections as they're plotted off. So if you are interested in seeing one of these, we do have these available. They're also on the library's website, so we can get those and you can find loved ones.
How many acres is it now?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask. I'm not completely sure. There have been a few different additions. The main part of the cemetery is kind of just on this side of the creek bed, but then there's also an older Catholic section. There's a new Catholic section. The Hebrew section is down at the bottom. And then there's also all of the like 30s and 40s numbers that are out further back. So I'm not even sure what the acreage is of it now. It's probably in city records though that they have, how much they've added on over the years, but I don't have an exact number for you. So the city vault, you all seen the city vault? Been down that way? It's no longer in use, but it was originally used as a location for deceased individuals to lay and rest until their burial location could be either dug or created. So like say one of the mausoleums or the crypts that's down there also, if a person was going to be placed into one of those, they would have to get that built up. So the city vault was where a person would be in rest until that location was ready to go. It would also be used in times, maybe like right now, when it's really, really cold out and maybe they couldn't get down to dig, however many feet they were digging at that time for a grave. The ground was too frozen. So they would use the city vault as a kind of temporary holding location. It is no longer in use, but I did find some interesting records about it. MS Magoon was one of our city folk who died in 1878, and he was actually a resident of the city vault for 5 months. Anybody want to take a guess how much it cost to be housed in the vault in 1878 for $2 a month? $2 a month. Today, that's around $30 a month. And, $1 a day, basically, in current rates. I did some checking around, and there's really not vaulting fees done anymore. It's not something that's done anymore. Modern technology has changed to make it so that they have warming blankets that they can actually lay over an area before they dig a grave. They have a lot of different technology that has adapted to current climates so that they can make grave digging a little bit easier. But Mr. Magoon was a lumber dealer. The top of the gravestone says, "To my beloved husband," and has a lot of really intricate scroll work on it. The receipts that are here, like I mentioned, they talk about the vaultage fee. The one at the top, it says $25 to the receipt of a marker. I'm trying to wrap my head around the concept that this grave marker was $25. I don't even fathom how much this would have cost. I mean, we're talking probably $20,000 in today's exchange. I mean, it was carved by hand. There was no machinery that was involved in it. If you can actually see what it says at the top of that receipt, it says Ben Bodden and Son. Who's heard the name Bodden in Keokuk? The Bodden house that was down there at 3rd Street, that they took the building down, stored everything. They're going to be repairing the foundation and replacing it. So Mr. Bodden, that lived in that tiny little house, is the one that created this incredible stone. Yeah, it's like right behind advanced physical therapy. Yep. Mr. McNally's wife passed away in 1891, and her funeral record said that the cost was $250, which is about $7,400 in today's exchange. It's comparable to a funeral in today's exchange, but still, this is just I can't even wrap my head around it. It's gorgeous. James F. Cox was the secretary of Iowa Insurance Company. Just how intricate this marker is. I'm not sure if Bauden also did this one, but I suspect he did based on the design and the style of it. The Carnival family has a monument that's down by the city vault. There are several members of the Carnival family interred, or I guess inurned here. Many of them were cremated. And at the time, the times that are listed, cremation really wasn't that common. The Carnival family was definitely ahead of their time based on just how cremation is, even now, is starting to become a lot more common. As cemetery space becomes less and less, it's starting to become a more and more popular option for folks at the end of their life. I actually have a photograph from the Carnival family of this incredible mausoleum, and it has the family gathered around the front, and it's for the funeral of the son, the youngest Franklin Carnival. There's, I think, 4 generations of Carnivals in this photo, and there's ivy going up the side. It's a really well-created mausoleum. The Carnival family lived over in Hancock County, if you've heard of Carnival Road. The father, Albert L., was a founding businessman here in Keokuk, so I think that's why the family was buried here. Other members of the family, such as Rose, who was the matriarch, she was involved in the Monarch Society, and she was very well known for her speaking talents. I like to think she was a very wonderful woman who knew a lot, spoke a lot, shared, just really put herself out there for her community. And that's kind of what I've gained from the Carnival family when they've talked about her, from what they know about her life. Other members of the family, one was the president of Kellogg Burge, another one was the president of Hotwell Company in Houston and involved in real estate, and another one of the sons, son-in-law, was a dentist in Los Angeles. So all of those folks are interred here with the Carnivals. This is probably one of the most unique markers at the whole cemetery. Mary Spicer Newberry was the wife of Fred Newberry. Fred was a well-known collector of antiques. If you know anybody who is a well-known collector of antiques, their spouse might think it's junk, which I think was the case, at least based on the lore. The rocking chair in the library is actually rumored to have been made from wood from their farm. I don't know exactly what this is. I think it was a cog or a gear, some sort of mechanical piece, but I don't know exactly what it is. But it's rumored that he placed it out of spite because his wife didn't like his collection. I don't even know what the thing is on the top. It's just a giant ball of stone. I mean, like a grindstone almost. It has a perfect seam around the middle. I don't know. But I look at it every time I go by. Another metal monument is for Antonia Montescal, who was born in Pequeña, Bohemia. Her marker is made of solid metal, and I really could not find a whole lot out about her. I did my best to try to find an immigration record. I believe she might have married after she came to the United States. So I was trying to track down maybe who her parents were. I really don't have much to say, unfortunately. I wish I did, but she's kind of one that is lost to history, which is unfortunate, especially when we start talking about the women of history. A lot of times women of history were Mrs. John Smith. So trying to trace back, to the lineage before them can get really, really squirrely. Does anybody remember hearing about this one? The Leggett family? Okay. When I first started doing this program, I had the monument for Cowboy Leggett, which is over on the left, which is the Iron Cross. And James's marker was added recently by his son. It is a testament to James's work in the oil industry. After James had brought to the city the design and intention for this, there was a lot of back and forth. There was some conflict. Long story short, the city decided to let him keep it, and rules and regulations and revisions for Oakland Cemetery and monuments going forward will be different. That's about all I know. I think it's remarkable, the structure of it. It just really speaks to the person that it is intended to memorialize, which, you know, a lot of these other monuments do the same, they just look different. They're not, none of them are quite what we expect, but this one is just, it's just significantly different. At the top of Cowboy's monument is a motorcycle helmet, and he was an avid motorcycle rider from what I understand. So that one also speaks to him a lot as well. A little bit more, quote, traditional, I guess what we would think of as traditional, is Carlton Holmes Perry and his family. Carlton was an educator before he came to Lee County in 1841. After that, he was a businessman and property owner, and he later helped to guide the construction of the Keokuk, Des Moines, and Minnesota Railroad. He also served as president of the Keokuk Library Association, and with his wife, they have two children, Howard and Catherine. The wife's name is Elizabeth Ann Wolcott, and they adopted Sadie Wolcott, who was the daughter of Arthur and Sarah Ann Morrison Wolcott. They are all interred here at Oakland. This is a very, very large monument. It is definitely one that you will see from a distance. So if you're driving through, you will see this one from afar. And each one of the sides has a little bit of text on it. Talks about one of the family members, their birth dates, death dates. It's very, very much a portrait of the family in stone. General Curtis, I'm sure you all know the statue of Curtis on the horse down at the riverfront. It used to be at 3rd Main in front of the library. General Curtis was a Civil War Union Major General, and he had many other military posts throughout his life. He was appointed to Congress prior to the Civil War, and after the war, he was commissioned to help negotiate, I use that term loosely, with Plains Indians, and later oversaw the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad. His wife, Belinda Buckingham Curtis, and their children are also here. You can see that there's several markers within the boundary of the fence line around the family plot. It's a pretty good condition for the age that it is based on what it's been through. And Hoobinger, of course. We all know about Hoobinger, right? We've heard of Roquette, we've heard of Hoobinger's life in the working world. He started out as a baker. He developed a formula for elastic starch and opened the J.C. Hoobinger Company, which is now known as Roquette. His influence in Keokuk included railways, power plants, telephone services. There was an amusement park. There was a casino, theaters, an absolutely massive estate. But by 1900, his fortune had dwindled, and he was living in a boarding house at 616 High, which is just down the block from the library. He died at the age of 57, and at the time of his death, his personal wealth was $50,000. That's only about 10% of what it was in the height of his income. But in today's equivalency, that's about 1.6 million. Could you imagine living in a boarding house with 1.6 million? I don't know the circumstances exactly that led to his time in the boarding house. I don't have all the details. But I do know that there is a rumor that there is supposed to be a glass of wine put out for Mr. Hoobinger once a year on the anniversary of his death. The caretaker of the cemetery is to sit and have a glass of wine with him. Yes, sir.
I've been in that one. We had done lots of ones for.
Tell me more.
It has a mosaic floor. Over the whole thing.
Okay.
And supposedly, Hoobinger's wife was in a casket, but it was full of paraffin. So she wouldn't change or anything. There wouldn't be any decomposition.
Oh.
But it's really neat.
Yeah, I was hoping to be able to get in touch with some members of the family, either for Hoobinger or one of the other families that maybe have loved ones at one of the mausoleums in that area. So so that I can talk to him a little bit more about, you know, the mausoleums and the things like that they have, knowledge of there, so that some of those stories aren't lost. Because, you know, at this point, I don't know of anybody besides you that mentioned it, that's been in Hoobinger's mausoleum.
There are some bases in there too on the sides towards the front. There's colored glass windows.
Mhm. There's a few mausoleums kind of like this in the newer sections, and you can see into them. They have glass panes at the front you can see in, but a lot of the older ones they don't have, or if they did, they've been broken out and replaced with block. So they're, but I mean, you know, Hoobinger has the wrought iron bars, and it's a very stately piece. Harriet Angeline Martin Cook is significantly different from Hoobinger. As much as we know about J.C. Hoobinger, taking it to the opposite extreme, I could find 0 facts about this woman. I tried. She is the wife of, listed in all the things she's listed as wife of, or Mrs. Even in the census records, which the most recent one would have been for 1840 based on the year of her death, she is just listed as a female in the home. She's not listed as an actual name, just a female in the home. Her husband's name was J.H. Cook. They lived here in Keokuk, and if you note the date of her death, it's 1847, which is at least probably 3 to 4 years before Oakland was established. So what this means, at least what I've interpreted from this, is that she was likely interred in one of the other small cemeteries, and then when Oakland opened up and they had to relocate the deceased, she was one of the ones that was moved to Oakland. And also the block number 2 indicates that she's toward the front of the cemetery, so that would have been one of the earliest burials there. So I think she was a reinterment. You can see the weeping willow on the top. Willow trees grew quickly. They were relatively hardy, but of course the weeping part of it, it speaks to grief. So that's some symbolism that they put into her stone as well. Let's see, I don't even think it has her age listed. Yeah, it's his birthday unknown.
Is he buried there too?
I don't believe so. I would suspect that, and this is a lot of speculation on my part, that she likely died in childbirth, somewhere around there. Since he's not buried there, I didn't see any children listed with him also. So I'm assuming that, you know, if she died in childbirth, the child survived, he went on, remarried, and likely moved out of the area. So Samuel Freeman Miller, I'm pretty sure a lot of folks have heard of him in this area. He was admitted to the bar in 1847 and was a lawyer here in Keokuk. He was nominated to the Supreme Court by Abraham Lincoln. Miller's house at 318 North 5th is the home of the Historical Society and the Miller House Museum since 1965. And Miller is buried here with his second wife, Eliza. His first wife, Lucy Ballinger Miller, is buried nearby. Lucy Ballinger is descended from the Ballinger family who came from Kentucky. And they had a very prominent estate down on River Road. We have lots of history on the Ballinger family. So the Ballingers and the Millers were pretty closely tied. These tiny little markers, from a distance, I thought they were granite. But when I got up closer to them and started asking questions, I was told that they're chimney pipes. There's no date marked on any of them. Jerry Bresnahan, Grace Marie Phillips, Johanna Fitzpatrick, I believe they were all siblings. So I believe that these 3 siblings were interred together with these similar markers. Priest circle over in the Catholic section. Reverend Thomas OReilly lived from 1844 to 1909. The inscription reads, pastor of St. Peter's Church for 35 years, apostle of Iowa parochial schools, earnest advocate of total abstinence. May he rest in peace. I got a chuckle out of that. Earnest advocate of total abstinence. Directly behind him, the one that in the fenced-in area, is the resting place of Reverend Maurice Howard. He was born in Thomastown County, Limerick, Ireland in 1813 and was ordained as a priest in November of 1842. He served 45 years in the priesthood, and he died while serving as a pastor of St. Francis Church here in Keokuk. The iron on his fence is, I think, in pretty good condition, given what it's seen in all these years that it's been there. There's a few pieces that are missing, but in general, it's very ornate, and it doesn't look too bad for its age, given that I don't think it's ever, I don't think it's been replaced. Over on the other part of the Catholic section, I call this Nun's Circle or Sister Circle. I don't know if it actually has a name, but I was looking at this and I started to see this symbol on all these different markers. And so I looked at it a little bit more. These are all nuns from here in Keokuk. And let's see, there's Mary Benedicta McHugh, Mary Anna Lanigan, Mary Agnes Journay, Mary Amy Burke, Mary Louisa Schwartz, Mary Gabriella Rice, Mary Cecilia Creed, Mary Frances Claggett, Catherine Mahoney, and Martina Murphy. The last two are the ones over here on the side. The six here in the middle, I believe that they all died while working at one of the Civil War hospitals. Their dates of death are 1861 to 1864, and as nuns and sisters, they would have served in a hospital. I believe they likely died of consumption, given some of the dates that are listed. They're very close together. So I think, given the nature of consumption, tuberculosis, I suspect that they contracted it pretty close together. Mary Gabriella Rice and Mary Cecilia Creed's obituaries listed that the funeral procession was one of the largest the city had ever seen. So I really think that was an interesting testament to the service of these nuns who, literally gave their lives for others. At the other end of this section is the larger stone with the cross at the top, and that one was for Reverend Jacobin Orth. These two small stones are for Charles and Ann Riffley. The Riffleys, Charles was born in Germany, and he served in Company A in the 30th Iowa. He later marched with Sherman, and he served as an alderman for the 5th Ward here in Keokuk. Ann was born in Kentucky and was part of a pioneer family. She arrived here in 1840 and was married first to E.J. Hamlet in 1850. They had 3 children, and then she married Charles in 1860. Her obituary described her as a sweet and patient woman, which I think is pretty high praise. The reason I took note of these two stones is that they are almost identical except for the markings at the top. Ann's is on the left-hand side. Hers has a flower at the top of the center, and Charles's on the right has a set of clasped hands and the Oddfellows symbol at the top. It also has the flag and the veterans marker next to it. There we go. The Crane family, Obadiah and Nancy are two of the ones that are first listed. They were living here with son and daughter-in-law in 1850. Obadiah Jr.'s wife is buried here, but he remarried and moved to California. George's marker has a Masonic square encompassed with flowers, and Ellsworth and Sarah were married in 1891. They're also buried here. Ruth and William were two of the other children, and they did have another daughter, Hazel. At the very front, you can see a small stone. That is a marker for Elizabeth Fassett and her infant who died in 1852. And with that death date, they would have likely been among the earliest burials in the cemetery. I skipped one. Okay. The Bokrat family, Christian Adolf Bokrat was born in Germany in 1829, and he arrived in the U.S. in 1885 and established himself as a brewer, because brewing is very important back in these times. The ad stated that his premium cream ale is approved by doctors to be the healthiest and best drink for family use. Family use, not just, the adults. The wife Dorothea and son Rudolph are also buried here. Dorothea died in 1899. Young Rudolph was only 10 at the time of his death in 1869. His cause of death was listed as congestion of the brain. That would have possibly been a stroke, a head injury, meningitis, or smallpox. The Cole family, a literal family stone. This stone, I could almost put my arms to each end of it if I stood right in front of it. Definitely not around it, but about like this. John Cole was the superintendent of the Keokuk Hamilton Bridge. He died in January of 1924, and he was married to Lulia, who died in March of 1940. S. Chandler was in the lumber business, and he married Iva Cole Carter, who died in 1972. One of the daughters, Ora, died in 1971, and she was the daughter of John and Lulia. She was a teacher here in Keokuk. That's her down at the bottom. Iva was another daughter, and one of the things that I learned about the family is that they like to take trips to London. There's a lot of different articles throughout society newspapers here in Keokuk that talks of them returning from a trip to London or returning from a trip abroad. The trips that I found they took were always near the daughter Ora's birthday, and they started after the father passed away in 1924. Based on from what I learned from their obituaries, the women of this family like to spend time together. They love to travel. They love to go visit other members of the family in far-flung places across the country. They were also incredibly socially connected here in Keokuk, especially with the Benevolent Union and a lot of other charities, social groups, and their church. The Rappleys, I've got Uriah and Letitia Rappley. Uriah was born 1808 in New York and died in 1878, and he was a baker. Letitia was born in 1813 and died in 1881. Similar to the other stones, the husband and wife stones are almost matching, they're almost identical. The only difference is that Uriah's has the name at the bottom, and there's a very small period at the end of it. That was just a notation style that they had for stones at that time. It's just a feature that they did, but otherwise, they're very, very similar. These two small stones are rather pieces of stones, I guess, that tell the tale of two children, Thomas Donovan on the left and Mary Olive Dowling on the right. Thomas died in 1856. I did have conflicting information about his birth date and age, but as best I can tell, he died at about the age of 7. The plaque indicates a birth of 1819, but based on some other information I found, I think it was actually 1849. Mary Olive Dowling died 1859 at the age of 2 years and 6 months. She was the daughter of T. and M. Dowling of Hancock County. There was a snippet of information I found that said that she died as a result of burns in a fire. There was not an obituary for her. Obituaries at this time really didn't exist in the local newspapers. They would have been more of a death announcement, but certainly not for children. They just wouldn't have had something of that nature. Some other children that I found are the Fulton Kids. There are a handful of them here, and there's also 2 other adult children that are buried nearby. Charles, Albert, Carrie, Maggie, and Willie. The first 4 died in the 1850s, relatively close to each other, and Willie died in 1864. It's kind of hard to make out in the photo, but the first 3 on the left have a sleeping lamb. The one here on the right has lamb. That's Willie's. You can tell his stone is a little bit different since he passed away later on. The second one from the right, I believe, is Maggie's. It looks like it has a doll on it. If you really can get close up to it and kind of see past some of the age and everything, But the 4 boys have the sleeping lamb, and the girls has a little doll. As you can imagine, children didn't always grow to be adults. There's lots of, and as I go on a little bit more, you're gonna hear me talk about lots of children who didn't make it to adulthood. The sad fact was that medical treatment, illness, things were a lot different than they are now. So yeah, these are just one of the reminders that life was very precious for these young ones. Across the way from the Fulton Kids, Frank and Jesse Rudick are a set of brothers. Frank was born in 1861 and died in 1865, just after his 4th birthday. Jesse was born in 1869 and died in 1878 at the age of 8 years, and their parents are buried in Columbus, Indiana. The archway is used as a symbol as the gateway to heaven. They were brothers, but they never met. There's another, couple more that you'll see that are similar. The dates of the siblings cross just so that, the siblings never knew each other. The Kilborn family from here in Keokuk. Each side of the Kilborn monument has engravings that are similar to the one here. It has birth and death dates. Often there's a second name. A lot of times it has the relationships of the different family members. Let's see, David, Harriet Rice, Emma, L.H., Harriet E., George E., and Augusta Wells Kilborn are all buried here. Emma's husband was an ordained priest in All Saints Episcopal Church in Philadelphia, and she returned to Iowa after his death in 1910. David and Edward Kilborn were among the earliest pioneers in Lee County, and they laid out the village of Montrose. David would later go on to become a mayor of Keokuk, and their son George married Augusta Wells. The entire Kilborn family would go on to be a leading force in society, in politics, business. There's a lot of things in this area that have the Kilborn name on them in some way. These 2 are one of my favorites. Can anybody read what any of this says? Anybody have an idea?
I can read the death date on.
Okay. The one on the left is Thomas Ryan, and the one on the right is Annie. These stones are about this tall. I mean, maybe a foot off the ground, and they're maybe about 8 to 10 inches wide. All I could see when I found these stones was Kilkenny, Ireland, and 1827 to 1880. So I came to the library and I started digging through records. What I found was Thomas and Annie Ryan were from Ireland. They lived here in Keokuk. Thomas was a stonemason. He lived from 1827 to 1880, and he died of consumption, as was a common cause of death. Annie lived from 1829 to 1892 and was likely a homemaker. Her obituary states that her funeral was well attended, as many in the community were incredibly fond of her. Her stone is this one here on the right. You cannot see a thing. But because they're so close together and the way that they're shaped, I put it together. They are husband and wife. That is their stone together. Anytime I go out to the cemetery to place flowers, I like to put something out for them. The majority of Oakland's permanent residents are a lot like Thomas and Annie. They aren't, the big Kilborn stones. They aren't, these big sprawling mausoleums, anything like that. They are everyday citizens. They came here, they lived their lives, and I'm sure they made an impact in some way. But yeah, they're just, everyday citizens. Some of the urn top markers in the cemetery, there's Oscar Cutler and Susan Riggs Hale. Oscar was involved in the banking business and later in iron and steel industries. The Hinman family, Botsford Bennett Hinman assisted in building the first Methodist Episcopal Church at 300 Exchange, and he was later a superintendent of the Chatham Square Methodist Church. The Hinmans were the parents of Ida Hinman, who would go on to become a feminist, a journalist, a suffragette, and a temperance activist. Amos Hinman is the father of Botsford, and he is on the reverse side of the Hinman monument. The Wapich Wapik, I'm not sure. Family, what is it? Oh, I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. William Sr., William Jr., Stephanie, and Julia. There's another daughter, Henrietta, who is buried nearby with her husband, Jacob Schouten. William was originally a baker by trade. He's later listed as a capitalist, which meant that he lived on the income provided by ownership of land, stock, or by loaning money to others. So I think, judging by the stone, I think they were doing okay. He was born in Germany and became a refugee after a military battle. He was taken prisoner until he was forced into Army service in 1851, and then he came to the United States in 1852. The Bartlett and Pollock family plots. HD and Sarah Bartlett are buried here with several of their children. Melissa was nearly 4 when she died in 1854. James Henry died not long after that in 1854. Ida Bell was about 18 months old, and their father, H.D. Bartlett, was a deputy marshal here in Keokuk. As the deputy marshal, one of his jobs would have been to help dig the graves for Oakland Cemetery. So I found this photo of him, and I kind of went, no! I was excited. I get really excited by pictures. The Pollock family, just down the road from them, includes father Samuel, daughter Zella, and son Harvey. Samuel was a grocer at Keokuk and built a home at 326 South 6th. His widow resided there until 1887. The Hughes Camp family plot is just off of the creek bed in Oakland Cemetery. It's surrounded by a border. It is engraved at the front. It's kind of hard to see in this photo, but there is a bench at the back, and there's an open grassy area in the middle. Folks used to go to the cemetery and have picnics with their loved ones. Now, if you see somebody having a picnic at a cemetery, you probably give them all kinds of strange looks. I personally, I don't think it would be that strange. I've sat and had talks with my paternal grandmother at her grave. I like to think she's there in spirit, or at least that I can, communicate with her in that way. But at the time that this was constructed, they did things a little bit differently. There are photos of entire families having picnics at the cemetery. They would go out on decoration day and they would clean up the cemetery. They would, take care of the graves. They would clean them up. They did things a little bit differently. They weren't nearly as afraid of the cemetery as folks are now. You sometimes hear of kids holding their breath as they drive by the cemetery, or things like that. Do you hold your breath when we go by the cemetery?
I used to.
No.
My friend, my ex-friend, actually, she told me if you were within 100 feet of a cemetery driving by or walking past, you breathe, you would inhale the soul.
You would inhale the soul, right?
Of like the nearest.
Think of the tens of thousands of souls. Taking a deep breath, right? So the next time you're out at the cemetery, think about having a picnic. I don't know.
Can we do that?
Sure. The Nichols family are actually neighbors to the Hughes Camps. They're just down the road and across the street, as you might say. Jonathan and Drusilla are interred here with their children, including an infant son. The entire family was involved in the telephone business here in Keokuk, specifically bell service. The Martins and their children, Lizzie and Gracie, are on the other side of the cemetery. There's a small wall around this family plot. It's kind of hard to see in the photo, but the stone of Lizzie and Gracie has a tree on it. This advertisement for James Martin's grocery store, it's almost the same tree.
Groceries.
That's a C. There's a C in there.
No, that looks like an O.
Gracie died at the age of 3 years, and Lizzie died just over 4 months later at the age of 2 months. And again, like so many of the other children that I talked about, these siblings never met. I'm thinking that the mother would have been pregnant with the younger one when the older one died. Bernard Slavin. Oh, this man has me perplexed. He died in August of 1874. His will said that $1,500 was to be reserved for his memorial at this Catholic cemetery. At the time of his death, he lived at the boarding house, And his will also left $3,000 to the wife of the boarding house owner. This is no small amount of money in 1874. Prior to coming to Keokuk, he lived in Oskaloosa, and there were no connections to the boarding house owners. The newspaper articles, which I just happened to find this morning, I was like, I've got to have something else I can tell these folks about this man. There's got to be something. Yep, the newspaper articles indicate that the will was contested. And this says 1875, so this is well into the next year that we're talking about here. This court case goes on. The articles detail that the will was contested and the Catholic Church lost $16,000 to revert back to Slavin's 3 nieces. It's about $416,000 in today's exchange. The article also talks about the case being pursued, but nothing was ever indicated as to who he was. It does say Old Father Slavin. I didn't really see that there was a religious affiliation, so I'm not sure if it meant father as in paternal type of father. This man is a mystery. I've tried. I really did. But his nieces ended up being the recipients of the property. I don't know if anything ever happened with the money that was left to the boarding house owner. I don't know how the boarding house owner even got into the will.
But yet the monument had to cost something.
Yep, the monument was established.
Yeah.
Yep. So someone, I don't know if it was the boarding house owner that said, okay, well, no, you said to put this money aside for the monument. They put the monument there. And this thing is huge. I mean, it is easily probably 10 to 12 feet tall. It is very, very large. But he came here, passed away, and then this whole court case ensued. So this is a real mystery to me. And someday, I swear, I'm going to find the rest of it, and I'm going to finally be able to sleep at night.
Maybe you'll die and I'll find it.
Well, that would be helpful. If you could do it before I die, that'd be even better. So a little bit about cemetery symbolism. I want to give you a quick rundown on that. Catherine Maple, the wife of Jacob Maple, who is the smiling individual in the photograph. Catherine Stone has an angel on it. She was the mother to at least 11 children, according to Ancestry.com. She was born 1799 and died 1873. The upper middle stone looks like it has wishbones on it. I think that is another Catherine Maple, but the rest has become unreadable over time. There is a laurel wreath on that one and clasped hands. The bottom middle, it has a laurel wreath, which symbolizes triumph, and an inverted torch, which symbolizes the extinguishing of life. Crossed swords indicate a death in battle. The name is now unreadable, and you can tell that the stone is actually broken in half. The top part is sitting on the bottom. Over here is Isaac Price. He was born 1822 and died 1855. The finger pointing up indicates a sudden death and the soul being bound for heaven. Isaac died of typhoid fever at the age of 33, and his obituary says that he died without the comfort of his wife or children nearby as they were away visiting her family. So, sudden death indeed. Gordon Oscar and Augusta S. Worcester. Oscar was the name that he went by. He served in the Civil War in Iowa and Missouri and died of what is suspected to have been a stroke while waiting for a train at Montrose. His wife Augusta lived from 1837 to 1883. On their stones, there is crown and scroll work, and that symbolizes reward and glory in the afterlife. Charles Carver is over on the left, along with John Carver. John is the father of Charles. City directories indicate that Charles was a clerk, but it didn't say where. A lot of them just said the job listing, not the location. The symbol of wheat on their stones indicate a long and fruitful life for John Carver. Born 1798 and died 1877. So a long life indeed, given the times that he went through. Back over to block 2 at the very front of the cemetery. There's a lot of roses on the stones. The stone of Hezekiah Jones, it could have been a symbol for a life cut short as he died of pneumonia at the age of 31. Hezekiah's brother, E.H. Jones, was married to Sarah Jones. There are several small rosebuds on that stone. The small roses could have indicated a bond between two people, such as for a mother and child. And I didn't find an indication to say if there was a child buried with Sarah, but often based on the symbolism, a child would have been buried with the mother, especially if it was an early pregnancy and she lost a baby. The willow tree on the stone for Benjamin Jones, again, indicates loss and mourning. He was the father of Hezekiah and E.H. Jones, so father-in-law to Sarah. He died in 1851 at the age of 39. Another willow tree is over here on the marker for H.W. Dillon, and the carving of Jesus on the stone next to him belongs to James J. Bryce. The Jesus face on the stone indicates that he was a man of faith. Bryce died in September of 1861. His stone looks like it says doctor, but all records indicate that he was a merchant. So I'm not sure if he was a doctor of philosophy or I'm not sure what was going on there. Something interesting though. There's a lot of different fraternal organizations that you'll see as you go through Oakland Cemetery. The Oddfellows, the Masons, we've got Knights Templar also. John Carter has both Masons and Oddfellows on his stone here on the right. Charles Allen on the just on the inside, he was with the Knights Templar. He was also a deputy county clerk. Previously, he was a justice of the peace and occasionally an acting coroner. William Dillon and William Goldberg also have fraternal insignia on theirs. Oddfellows for William Goldberg and the Masons for William Dillon. The Hines and Driscoll family, the two stones at the front are almost very well balanced. They have stayed in really good balance since they were placed in the 1880s. The stone for Patrick Hines, it's a carved tree, but it looks like branches are broken off. On the front of it, it actually has a carved scroll, and you can still see the outline of the rope that it would have been draped over this branch, all carved out of stone, and all still level. And I don't know that it's been touched. I think it's still level. So however it was placed, it was done very well. Patrick's son Felix had this placed for him. He died in September of 1868 at the age of 83, and the mortality record shows his occupation as a dock worker at the age of 83. He was a dock worker on the canal, and his cause of death was intermittent fever. His son John died at the age of 20, and his sister Margaret placed the stone. These two came from Tipperary County, Ireland. The Driscoll family is just behind them. That is Michael and Johanna, son Michael, and Ellen and Timothy. You can still kind of see a little bit of a border around the back of around the back of the Driscoll family. Could have had two purposes. One was to indicate that it was a family lot, and the other was to keep it from sliding down the hill, because this entire section is on the back of the hill, which again makes the stones for the Hines family really significant because they are straight upright. So there are a few relief style stones within Oakland Cemetery on the railroad construction. Nellie died in 1954. The Bertram family, William and Minna were the parents. Colleen was their daughter. Colleen was one of the first women doctors here in Keokuk. She wore pants. I was blown away. She had on pants. But her father was a surgeon and medical director for the Army before he came to Keokuk in 1876. Also, the Joy family, I'm sure lots of folks have heard of the Joys. They were prominent within Keokuk business and beyond. And of course, the Grand Ann that we lost a few years ago to fire, it was their family residence over on Grand Avenue. An interesting thing about the Snyder marker, Ida Snyder with a Y married George Snyder with an I. It got kind of squirrely as I was digging through some records. I thought, now wait a second. But they were farmers in rural Lee County. Again, just your average folks, but to see the stones carved kind of in that backwards relief, it's kind of unusual. If you're in front of the city vault and you look up, you will see the Sample family. There actually used to be a bust of Mr. Sample in the middle. It was lost to vandalism many years ago. They didn't replace it. But over 21 members of the Sample family are included either in or around this monument. They're carved within the stone there around the center. Esther Jeffrey Sample is among the earliest deaths in the family, and that was in 1850. So I think she was likely reinterred from another location. The Sample family home was at 205 North 5th and was constructed in 1859. The Woolley family plot, William was a carpenter and his sons continued the family business. They were charged with building the Westminster Presbyterian Church, along with several residences throughout Keokuk. One of the buildings that they constructed is over on 5th and Blondo, and you can actually still see the Woolley family name on the building itself. All right, I've got two big ones. If y'all are ready for these. The Elder, Burge, Irwin, and Hershey family. I was able to find a lot of photos for them, which is always great because you like to be able to put a face with the name, right? Joshua Elder was a mayor of Keokuk, postmaster, a railroad executive, and county food administrator. Catherine Burge was the daughter of CP and Lucy Burge. Elizabeth Irwin was married to Joshua for only 9 years before he died. Julia Kellogg, Elder Hershey's marker, indicates that her ashes abide in Memorial Garden, First Unitarian Church of St. Louis, and the inscription reads, "Courage and let the future trouble you no more." C.P. Burge was one of the first in organizing the Keokuk and Hamilton Water Power Company, and he was part of the Kellogg-Burge family of wholesale grocers. He was a contributor of property for the Benevolent Union Home and established the fountain in Rand Park. That is him up at the very top corner in a very distinguished looking hat. Does anyone know if there's been a proposal at Rand Park Fountain, or do you know of anybody personally? I was suspecting that there was one around Christmas time, but I was never able to confirm it. So need to look into that, but I always thought it would be an interesting place. There's been a lot of wedding photos there. Lots of actual weddings have taken place. But I know that there's also a ring that they have during the City of Christmas that lights up, and I just thought it would be interesting. Lucy Kellogg Burge married C.P. Burge in 1867, and her obituary says that she had been working with her beloved flowers when she was stricken ill. And he placed the fountain at Rand Park in her memorial. So that's why I asked about the proposal, because it was a very romantic gesture on his part. All right, so this is the last one I've got for you tonight, but it is a doozy. I just so happened to see this marker as I was walking through and taking pictures, and I thought, that's different. I wonder what their story is. I didn't know what I was getting into. This is the marker for Barrett Williams and his family. Barrett had 11 children, 5 children with his first wife, and 6 children with his second wife, who was named Margaret. Only 2 of these children would live past the age of 14. Yeah, and they are all listed on this marker. B.A. died in 1873 at the age of 64 years. One of the first sons was 3 years old, that's Barrett Jr. Elmira was 1 year old. Thomas S. was 11 months. Frank was 1 year. Beulah was 14 years. Edward was 10 years. George was 3. Hattie was 1. Katie was 4 months. Barrett A. Jr. lived from 1861 to 1835. So Barrett A. Williams and Margaret A. Steele were married in 1849 here in Lee County. They divorced in October of 1872. Divorced in 1872. But, she was the one that filed. She filed for it. My mind was blown. She remained in possession of the home and all of its contents, as well as one cow. It was in the decree, I promise. It was there. He was to provide alimony in the amount of $5,000, which is $94,000 today. Now, part of this would go on to become the subject of a lawsuit after his death from a bacterial skin infection 3 months after the divorce settled. So I'm looking at this going, all right, the divorce settles and then he dies. What happened in those months? What was going on? You know, what was this about? The BA was a merchant here in Keokuk, and city directories indicate that he owned a stove and tin company, in later years joining with his son Horace to carry on the business. Horace Williams, who was the son of Barrett and his first unnamed wife, is also buried at Block C here with the family, including 2 sons, Horace Jr. and Barrett A., who died of typhoid dysentery. There was a lot of sadness and grief and loss within this family. Exactly. Margaret and a stove merchant named Augustus Strobel were residing as widow and boarder in 1880. So Margaret is the widow of Barrett, who is the family patriarch here. So Margaret and the stove merchant, he's the boarder in this house, or is he? Because Margaret and August are buried in Eugene, Oregon, near Barrett Jr., and they were remarried. So somehow Margaret and this stove merchant boarder, who coincidentally worked for Barrett during his lifetime, take up and they take the son to Eugene, Oregon, and live happily ever after out on the Oregon coast. I never found out what happened to Barrett's first wife. So there's several children buried here. The first wife is not buried here that I could locate. So this marker has a lot going on. There are vines, there's drapery, there was a tipped over flower basket, there's fruit. There is a lot to be said about this marker, which is what drew me to it. But the story in stone is that all of these names are listed, and it was a real whopper of a story once I got to it, because the wife divorced him and she kept the cow. My mind was blown. The more I read, the more I learned. It was like some sort of reality television show. I just couldn't help myself. So that's the tale of the Williams family. And this was my little cemetery friend. He literally followed me around as I took pictures. I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, up and down the tree, just followed me around. So I wanted to include him. My thanks to you all for coming tonight. My thanks to folks who have gone before me, Terry Altide, Dale Fox, James Cameron. Believe it or not, none of them are buried in Oakland. I checked today. James and Dale they were cremated and their remains are with family. Terry Altide is interred at the National Cemetery. So they led me in my efforts. I want to pay tribute to them because they taught me so much of what I know about the cemetery, and all the names listed within. I love this work that I do. All of the information that I presented to you tonight, I obtained through either library databases, library records, archives, city directories, things like that. So it's all stuff that we have available to you here as a patron. If you are ever interested in coming by, taking a look for records, finding out more about your family, loved ones, you know where to find me. I'm here most times, Monday through Friday, and the occasional Saturday. So I thank you all very much for stopping to see me tonight. Does anyone have questions? That was a lot of information. Yes, my dear. Oh yeah, you're avid users of our records.
Oh, yeah. Most of these graves were in the old part, right to the right as you drive in.
Yeah. What actually happened was I walked in and I took a spill and kind of twisted my ankle a little bit. So I kind of had to hobble and take the pictures as I could. The other ones I ended up going back at a little bit later time, but yeah, older and more intricately carved stones are definitely at the front of the cemetery. The one for the Williams family is kind of up on a hill, kind of tucked a little bit further. But there's actually they're little stones, and they just have the initials carved on them. It just says, ABG, or, whatever the case might be. It's just a little tiny stone about like that. So, yeah. Any other questions? And thank you all so much for coming. Please have safe travels.